ACME would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waterways of Greater Melbourne, the people of the Kulin Nation, and recognise that ACME is located on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. We also acknowledge First Nations people as the original storytellers of this land, and recognise their significant contribution to the contemporary moving image.
Thank you so much for joining us for this third session focused on media literacy. And today we are going to be focused on media literacy for years 4 to 8, kind of middle primary into lower secondary school. And we're really interested today to talk a little bit more about making media and how making media relates to critical thinking and media literacy. So we're going to define media literacy, talk about this idea of critical thinking through media literacy, the relationship between critical thinking and media literacy, and also, though, media making. We will talk about a framework for asking critical questions about the media, and then touch on media arts, the curriculum for years 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and 8. And then we've got some examples to share with you. So I'll be talking about this example, Rowan of Rin, and some Minecraft video production that students did in relation to that book. And then Amanda is going to be talking about a leadership video example. So when we talk about media literacy, we talk about the ability to apply critical thinking while using and creating different kinds of media. So that's AMLA's definition. And the question that begs the question, I suppose, is, well, but what does it mean to apply critical thinking? And particularly today, we wanted to focus on what does it mean to apply critical thinking through creative practice? Because we think it's really important to emphasize that while we can watch media texts or deconstruct texts or analyze them for meaning and all of those kinds of things, it's also important to think about the critical reflection process as we're making media. And I think one of the reasons we wanted to focus on media production today is because we know that children in the kind of upper primary school and lower secondary particularly enjoy making media and getting the opportunity to create things. So yeah, it's great to be focusing on that in these years of learning. So today we're going to be referring to this model for thinking about media literacy and how we bring together these components of media making and then thinking critically. And this draws on some research that both Amanda and I have been involved with for a number of years, which is brought together through what we call this building blocks of digital media literacy. And so this has 4 areas of consideration. So at the top there, we have digital materials. And we know now that as we use media, as we make media, we are interacting with digital materials of different kinds. So these might be text, digital text, or images or sounds, or these days increasingly what we might refer to as synthetic media or AI-generated media. All of these can be examples of digital materials. Then we may have digital making processes that relate to those digital materials. So if we want to make a piece of video footage, for instance, we need to literally pick up a camera and record that video. Perhaps we need to put the camera on a tripod. We need to choreograph our actors so that we record them in a certain way in relation to the arrangement of the camera. All of this is very much a kind of material process of digital making. And if we're doing it with AI, perhaps we're just using prompts to do that, right? So we're using our literacy skills to prompt a generative AI tool to make those digital materials. So then we have this other process of media analysis, which is always taking place when we're making. It happens in conjunction with making. And then we have this process of conceptual thinking. So how we can arrange our knowledge in certain ways to make it useful for the digital making and media analysis process. And in media literacy, we talk about these 6 key concepts of technologies, representations, audiences, institutions, languages, and relationships. I suppose this can come across as being a little bit abstract, but we're hoping to provide you with some concrete examples today to show you in very practical ways what this means. But just as an example, if we ask someone to make a short piece of video footage to tell a story, then we would be thinking about, well, what are the media languages that sit behind the creation of that piece of footage? For instance, were the students required to take close-ups and medium shots? When they edit those together, in what ways do they put them together using editing software, for instance? Is there music and sound that also adds to the meaning? So these are all media language processes. And then we might also think about the representations that are created through that process. So we can start to really break down the knowledge that we're developing underneath these 6 concepts. Okay, so let's talk about this. Okay, so the concepts in a bit more detail then. So if we're thinking about technologies, how are media technologies used to access, create, and circulate media? Representations, how do media portray people, places, and ideas? With audiences, who is the media made for and how do they respond? Institutions, which organizations produce, distribute, regulate, and educate about the media? Languages, how do media create meaning through combining images, sound, and text? And then relationships, what relationships do we have with the media and how are our relationships with other people and with society mediated? And so it's through asking these questions, whether we're making media or analyzing media, that we can develop this conceptual knowledge, and this becomes our critical framework for thinking about the media. Thanks, Amanda. So if we get a little bit more concrete then in terms of, well, what does this mean for curriculum? We can then turn to the media arts content descriptors. And hopefully you are aware that the media arts curriculum is part of the general arts teaching area in the Australian curriculum, alongside music, viz arts, drama, and dance. And media arts has a really fantastic set of resources that can be drawn upon to use in the classroom. And I'm not going to read through all of these in detail. Perhaps I'll look at them in a bit more detail for year 4, and then you'll see how these kind of step up for year 6 and then year 8 as well. But so with media arts content descriptors, we can refer to exploring and responding. So we can get students to explore where, why, and how media arts are created and or distributed across cultures, times, places, and or contexts. Creating and making, we can use media languages, media technologies, and production processes to construct representations that communicate ideas, perspectives, and or meaning. And you see those key concepts coming through very strongly there. With developing practices and skills, develop media production skills by exploring ways of shaping ideas, using media technologies, images, text or sound, and or interactive elements. And then presenting and performing, share media artworks in informal settings, considering responsible media practice. And that might be for media, that might be actually sharing a video file or something like that. So then if we go to by the end of year 6, we see similar descriptions, right? And then by the end of year 8, we see these being stepped up to be more appropriate for year 8. And as you know, all of these content descriptors are accompanied by elaborations in the curriculum. that tease out in much more detail the kinds of things that this might relate to as classroom practice. So what would a lesson look like in relation to any one of these? So yeah, this is all very helpful. So what we're going to do then is have a look at what this could look like in a practical example. And so I wanted to talk just briefly about this year 4 example, digital making with Minecraft. And this was an example that I had some association with through a research project that I was doing in a primary school here in Brisbane. And then subsequently, this example also was used as one of the work samples for version 8 of the Australian curriculum. So you can still actually, using the URL at the bottom left there, you can still go and have a look at these examples on the ACARA website. And this was to me, this was a very rich example and also a cross-curricular example of doing media arts in the classroom alongside English curriculum. So the students were reading the novel Rowan of Rin by Emily Rodda, which is kind of a classic middle primary school aged book, one that students enjoy a lot. So they read that novel, but then the teacher asked them to engage with the novel by reconstructing a scene within Minecraft. So the students had the education version of Minecraft available to them in their classrooms. And so they were required to go through this process of constructing a scene or two from the novel within the Minecraft space. And then they actually acted out a scene from Minecraft using their Minecraft avatars. Um, so they acted out a scene from the novel within that space. So they had to reconstruct the dialogue. They had to think about how the characters were interacting with each other. And while they were doing this, they had to screen capture. So then that screen capture produced a video file. So they brought that video file into video editing software. And so they edited the video to make it flow effectively. So if they'd made errors while they were recording, they could cut the errors out. If they wanted to have examples where they had close-ups and medium shots, they could achieve that through some of that video editing as well. And they just needed to get the kind of the pace of the story right through the editing process too. And they could record a voiceover. Sometimes they had to replace their original voices with new voiceover. And then they added music and sound effects too. And then once they were finished that whole process, they shared those productions with each other. And this was a really terrific process because it really meant that they engaged with the novel in a really deep kind of way, and in a way that was quite fun for them and meaningful as well. So I just wanted to break these steps down in just a bit more detail, just to give you a bit more of a sense of what each of these phases included and how this then relates to this idea of digital materials, digital making, media analysis, and conceptual thinking. So the step one then, after reading the novel, was reconstructing the scene from the novel in Minecraft. So this did involve adapting a script. So they had to analyze the script and then recreate it for this new context. So they had to take a couple of passages from the novel and do quite a bit of work actually to adapt the novel into a kind of a dramatized script that they could then recreate in Minecraft. Within Minecraft itself, they used Minecraft's digital construction tools to construct the sets for their scenes, using Minecraft as a kind of studio space, a media production studio space. And if you have seen kids using Minecraft, you know that it's all about placing blocks and using these different blocks to construct scenarios or settings. And in a way, I guess it acts a little bit like digital Lego. So you can, construct that scene for yourself. As I said, they developed their avatars for the characters, and then they had to act through the scene, moving their avatar through the space whilst recording their voice. And this required quite a bit of physical dexterity as well, because the students were on their laptops, and they had to kind of really be thinking about, well, what keys do I have to press to make my avatar do this action or that action? And they were thinking about speaking at the same time. So it was quite an intensive process. And it very much did rely on this conceptual thinking about media languages and technologies and representations, because they were thinking about, how can I use the technology to construct this? Um, do I go for a close up here? Do I go for a medium shot? And how am I portraying the characters in the story? All right, so on to the next one. Thanks, Amanda. So then once they exported the actual file of their recording, and they imported that file into their editing software, and they used the software then to focus on how the images flowed together, adding that sound and music to enhance the story, constructing the final version of it. Again, thinking about media technologies, languages, and representations in particular. And um, you can see how this maps directly onto the content descriptor as well. In this case, developing media production skills by exploring ways of shaping ideas using media technologies, images, sound, text, or interactive elements. Okay, better keep moving because we want to keep on. We've got to do the other example yet. So and then they shared their productions with each other. So they watched each other's videos in class, and they had really constructive conversations about the videos and how they relate back to how those videos related back to the novel. So they did quite a bit of classroom talk about saying what was successful, what didn't work so well. So in a way, the point of making videos wasn't to create this kind of polished version of the story. It was more so about thinking about how you tell a story in different kinds of ways. And then, what are the strengths and weaknesses of adapting the story? And I think that's why it was kind of such a clever thing, really. It was really such a rich way of having the students be involved in this digital making process, using digital materials to engage in so much depth with the novel. Okay. So the key points then would be that the adaptation creates a deeper engagement with the novel and enhances reading related literacy. Using Minecraft, I think, really connects to students' popular culture with classroom-based media literacy development. So, the students are quite excited to be using Minecraft because it's something that they enjoy. The process demonstrates how media texts are constructions based on a series of decisions about languages, technologies, representations, audiences, and relationships. And then this conceptual thinking can be developed and applied to other media examples. And so that's the overall goal here. And if you wanted to read more about examples of how Minecraft relates to digital making and implications for media literacy, there's an article that I've written that you could look up as well. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Amanda to talk about a different example.
Thanks, Michael. So I'm going to talk about an example that I saw in action a few years ago, and it was around students creating their own leadership video pitches to be part of leadership positions in the following year. So, although traditionally students had given a speech, the school had decided in this instance that the students would all make videos, and then those who wished to apply for leadership positions, they would show those videos on assembly and within the classrooms as a way of promoting the ideas and the values of the students who were electing for the following year. So there are a couple of stages to this. And as Michael did, I'll just give a brief overview first, and then I'll dive into, I guess, some of the more nitty gritty about these and where we could really see particularly, I guess, the conceptual understandings of students being deepened and opportunities to further that as well. So the first thing the students needed to do was to actually plan the content. So what were they actually going to say and do in this video? The second thing was filming. So they actually had to film themselves or get their friends to film them and direct what they were requiring their friends to film as they were going, and also collect different types of B-roll footage. So what else could we potentially use, not just having someone standing there giving a speech, for instance? What other affordances of actually using a video to do this instead of just getting up on assembly? And some students were really creative with that. Then we needed to edit the video and then finally actually share the video. And the wonderful thing about, I guess, this particular video and sharing it is that there was a real world instance in which the students were really needing to share this video with real audience members who were going to essentially have some kind of action occurring as a result of this video. So if we look a little bit more deeply around planning the content here, so as I said before, this really involved drawing on this real world experience. So the students, not all of them, but a lot of them would go on to apply for these leadership positions. But the rest of the students would also be voting in these leadership for these leadership positions. So the students had to consider the traditional, I guess, speech-like aspects. So what kind of message were they intending on communicating to their audience? They needed to think about things like storyboarding the visual and the audio components. So once they sort of had written, I guess, more of a traditional speech, they then had to think about how am I going to translate what I've done here into a visual and audio form. So students had to plan for that. And this is all happening before kind of, I guess, any technology is being used at this stage. And I think a really important through line throughout these whole 4 stages that we'll talk about is that the students here, they really had to consider their audience. So that was going to be an audience of peers and teachers and possibly students who were a little bit younger as well. They really had to consider who was going to watch this video, who am I making it for, what kind of information will they need in order to make an active choice there. Now, obviously, there are going to be times within the Australian political cycle in which there's going to be a lot of content that you can draw on from the media around that children might already or students might already have an understanding of. But I think it's really, I guess, important to be thinking about drawing on what the students have already learnt about the political scene that they might be kind of, that we might see around us, and making sure that if you, for instance, although I'm not explicitly talking about analysis here, kind of drawing on those instances where students probably have seen political campaigns or have seen kind of videos in the real world. They've probably seen either on social media or maybe billboards or wherever else it might be. They've probably seen some instances of this. So they have some kind of real world knowledge that they can bring and apply directly to this video alongside the structured, of course, activities that as teachers we would plan for. So once they've planned their content, we need to actually shoot the content. So here students, they were essentially the director of their own film, and they really needed to get their peers to help them film the footage, because you obviously want the candidate to be in the film that they were making there. So thinking about things like film language, so they really needed to consider things like shot sizes and angles and how we might convey meaning in that way. Did they want to use a high or a low angle to convey potential meaning? How would they actually show, if they were really great at helping the prep students, for instance, what kinds of shots would we need to actually show that in action? Would we need different kinds of shots, for instance, to show maybe some of their direct voice to camera kind of shots there? So really having to think about that in their planning, but also in directing their peers as they were filming. Again, thinking about the B-roll footage, so what else could we include? If we're going to capture our audience's attention and really convey meaning to them, what else do we actually need to include visually to show, that we mean what we say and that we're somebody who is worth supporting as we move forward there? And again, they're working from the planning document. So although once you've planned, it's not that everything, of course, needs to match exactly, but using that to make sure that we're thinking about what message we might be communicating to our audience. So I think the real through line, if we're thinking about the concepts here at the moment, is that concept of audiences, because this has such a real world implication potentially for some of the students there as well. Obviously, though, if we're thinking about the content descriptions and we're thinking about the key concepts, the students are actively making meaning here through the use of film languages and through the use of technology, and a particular, I guess, type of technology. Obviously, when we're filming here, I think campaigns that we might see for politicians obviously don't just stick to film, but they're potentially the technologies that we're constrained by in this particular example. And then students would edit the video. So again, this is fairly straightforward. This is not so different to other types of editing, I suppose. Editing the clips together that they've created, thinking about music, other sounds they might need, title, transitions, credits, voiceovers. But again, that whole way through, really critically reflecting on what kinds of interpretations an audience member might make of this. Are they actually creating relationships with the audience as they're through this video potentially, and how might they actually be able to do that through media languages, through the technologies, and so on there. And then just to finish up, actually sharing their video. So students in this case shared the finished video to firstly their class and and the other classes in the same year level. But of those students who elected to go on to nominate for a leadership position, they actually were shown on assembly. So all of the students who were involved in the voting process could use this to influence their decision making process. So it's potentially some opportunities for some questions and answers, for instance, after the video. So it's not that the video has to be shown in isolation necessarily. I think you can potentially have other ways of sharing this, where the candidates, I suppose, were there as well and able to form a kind of panel or something like that. So the video is I guess part of a suite potentially of these political campaigns, if I can put it like that. And then there's some real world results here. So, was the video actually successful? I mean, it's not to say that a video was successful or unsuccessful just because they were voted in or not, but we can kind of talk about that and what, potentially as an audience member, what were my reflections to the maker and what kinds of understandings did I get about their messaging as an audience member? So, we'll wrap it up there in terms of the examples, but just to, I guess, I'm not sure once I stop sharing, I'll be able to see some of the questions in the chat and whatnot. But thinking about maybe what questions you might have about media literacy for this age group, we've talked about a year 4 example and a year 6 example. But I think both of these examples that we've discussed, we could potentially look at how we could support students who are in the 7 to 8 years explore some of these ideas as well. And obviously the complexity and the depth would increase, and we would ask them to reflect on the concepts in different types of ways potentially. So just to, I guess, pop that question there, what else would you like to know about media literacy in that age group, and what might be useful for you when we're starting to explore that? And then just finally, just our contact details if you are interested in getting in touch with us. So I'm just going to stop sharing so that we can come back to the questions.
Thanks, Amanda. And we do have a couple of questions already, and yeah, it'd be great to see some more come in as well. The first question that I think I'll tackle here, and I'll have a go at this first, and then perhaps you can follow up as well. The first one is about the concept of institutions. So, as you and I have spoken, I suppose today we haven't referred to institutions much. We've talked more about, I guess, the textual things of languages and representations and the audience that we're targeting and that kind of thing. And We talked about the relationships, in relation to who am I trying to persuade, for instance, through a political advertisement. But we haven't talked too much about institutions. And for me, the important thing about institutions is that it really goes to that question of, why is the media being made in the first place? Nearly all media that we can look at is made for a purpose. It's been produced either for a commercial purpose, so it's being produced to make money, or it's being produced to inform potentially, and that doesn't mean it's not also making money, and or it might be being produced to persuade as part of a like a political campaign or something like that, right? So we do need to think about the institutional context in which something is made, and I think that um, it can be a bit abstract, and teachers sometimes, I know, do struggle with, well, how do I get information about institutions? Where do I go to find that information? Um, and I get that, like, it can be a challenge, but I guess it's useful to, first of all, group institutions into two broad categories, I would say. One of those categories would be older forms of media, or what we sometimes refer to as legacy media. And so we might be talking about the Hollywood studios as media producers, or we might be talking about television companies that make television programs, or the news, or we might be talking about the owners of the newspapers. And often there's a lot of debate about the Murdoch press here in Australia, for instance. So it's about those older forms of media. Um, but then, separate to that, these days we also really need to talk about the new media owners as well, which are the technology companies. So Google is, for all intents and purposes, a media company because it owns YouTube, for instance. Um, Meta is a media company because it owns Instagram, where a lot of images and video are shared. So we also need to think about how the technology companies come to play. And then the final thing I'll say is that it's important to be thinking about the business model that relates to this. How do these institutions make their money? And so, is this through a direct sale? Is it through advertising? Is it through subscription, or some other form of income generation? And these are very interesting questions to ask. And if you can get really amazing conversations going if you ask a class of year 5 students about why they see advertisements on YouTube. That will get some conversation happening pretty quickly. And it can be really useful to leverage that sort of idea to then talk about the fact that advertising generates income for the company where that has provided YouTube. Amanda, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I guess just to say that I think that, yes, it can be challenging, I think, sometimes for institutions, because sometimes we think there are particular facts that we need to find out or that we need students to know. But I really do think that institutions can be explored across all year levels. And if I think about the example of the leadership video we were just talking about, that idea of how does the media and the organizations who are supporting these particular, potential political campaigns, or what it might be, how are they actually creating that influence? And who benefits from that particular type of influence? So I think that this example actually lends a lot to institutions when you think about it that way. Um, but again, like thinking about the business of the media, how that's funded, how these political campaigns potentially are funded in the real world, and and why particular types of media maybe look at different political parties in different ways, and how we can maybe see some of that. So if I was, for instance, teaching this unit, absolutely production would be at the forefront here, but I would also be interspersing that with these kind of, I guess, critical looks at different types of media campaigns that politicians have run, even if they've been successful, who has funded them, why are they using particular types of media and platforms to project their message. So, we could see in the last election, for instance, we might have seen particular advertisements targeted at particular kinds of people. Why have they chosen to do that? And what's the benefit and influence there? So, I think it might seem challenging, and I'm agreeing that it is, but I think that there are some really important questions that we can begin to ask about that.
Yeah. All right. There's a question here about Minecraft itself. Is the Minecraft program free, or does the school subscribe? Do you know of any other programs other than Minecraft that can do a similar thing? So, as I understand it, currently all of the state education departments, at least, have got a statewide Minecraft license through Microsoft, because Microsoft owns Minecraft. So that's for the Minecraft Education Edition. So if you're in a government school, it's likely that there is an existing license and that you can use Minecraft in the classroom. And that's paid for at the department level. It's not paid for at the school level. If you're in an independent school or a Catholic school, you would have to investigate, whether it's available to you, I suppose. I don't think there's any other program that's quite like Minecraft in terms of the ways in which it allows that flexibility for making stuff. And it's become such a part of children's lives that most children have actually played Minecraft at some stage. Even if they're not avid gamers, they've probably played Minecraft on an iPad or something like that, or at least tinkered with it. And even if they haven't done that, they've probably watched Minecraft videos on YouTube, because Minecraft is one of those platforms that is incredibly popular amongst children. I think it is that for that reason, it's interesting how it connects directly to children's culture and to the things that they're already interested in and passionate about. And yeah, it has this added benefit that it can be used as a kind of media production studio. So maybe going on to whether media literacy can also be linked to and used in the English curriculum. Did you want to tackle
Oh,
that?
do we have a session for you? So I
Yeah.
think yeah, our very first session in this series was looking explicitly at that. So absolutely, media literacy can really be linked in aspects of the English curriculum. So if you are interested, I would recommend watching that session that we hosted. So that will be on the ACME website. The other resource, I guess, just to mention, is the fairly recent ACARA Media Consumers and Creators Curriculum Connection, where it explains and explores a little bit about how media literacy, or sorry, media arts, media arts, English, and digital technologies come together, and how media literacy can be embedded throughout those. So I would also recommend looking at that. But absolutely, we know that English teachers do a fantastic job of analysing the media with their students. And so I think what we're talking about today has been more about the making and the creating of media, but the two definitely go hand in hand. They can't happen without the other. And as we're making, we're really children and students are analyzing as they're going. So even though it might not be a traditional analysis in the sense that we're asking them to write down answers to questions or questioning them specifically about things, as they're making, they're having to make connections to what they've already known, and thinking about how what elements, for instance, they can use in order to move their meaning forward. So definitely really connected there.
Yeah. And look, the Rowan of Rin example that I provided was very much a cross-curricular media arts and English unit of work, and the teacher had outlined very clearly which aspects of the curriculum related to each, the different tasks that the students were performing as they read the novel and then converted the novel into media into a media product as well. So yeah, very, very deeply connected to English curriculum there. And, I think something that gets overlooked a lot is that to be successful with media production or just with media arts generally does require a lot of reading and traditional writing as well. So, those processes of writing a script or, for a political pitch or writing a script for, an adaptation of Rowan of Rin, that is very much, kind of deep literacy learning too. I see there's a question here about podcasting and
Yeah.
yeah,
I'll tackle that, and I'll
great.
tackle it because
Yeah.
if that's all right, because I'm like deep into the mushroom podcast at the moment, because I'm a little bit behind on my podcast listening. But so just to say that firstly, but then secondly, absolutely. So we've done podcasting, and Michael's been involved in that too with students in this year level as well. Podcasting is a really great thing, I guess, to be engaged with because students can really tell those stories and really concentrate on the audio. And they're really then having to, if it's an interview or if it's a narrative or whatever kind of podcast it is, really focus in on the genre and to think about how they're going to communicate that message within the restrictions of just audio. And that's challenging in lots of ways because you can't rely on the visual to tell the story. But I think that that constraint can also mean that we get some really great products where we really need to think about the questions that we're asking. We really need to make sure that we're explaining things in really clear ways to listeners and being really, I guess, concise in our messaging as well. We've done some podcasting where students have done more narrative style and they've included sound effects or they've used different programs to change their voices and had some fun those ways. But then I guess the more traditional kind of podcast around interview styles is also really great in this age group as well. So telling those stories that way and thinking
Yeah.
about that. But I think we're nearly running out of time. I've seen kind of Christine do the fade in, so I might hand back to Christine.
Thank you so much, Michael and Amanda, for such rich examples and, really rich practical classroom examples that I'm sure most of us can relate to. But what you've done is you've really supported us in understanding some of those underpinning concepts that, really form the foundation of media literacy in classrooms at all levels. For those of you who are participants, thank you so much for listening in and the fabulous questions, really interesting questions today. Really appreciate that. I should just let you know that we'd love to see you at our next session, which Amanda and Michael will again join us for. This time we're going to be looking at media literacy in the age of AI, which I'm really excited about. And that's in a couple of weeks on Wednesday, the 20th of August, and again at 3:45. So thank you all for participating. And once again, thank you so much, Amanda and Michael.